Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story 250 Years of the United States of America. I'm really excited to bring this episode to you. We have a lot to get into. We will be continuing where we left off with the annexation of West Florida last year, discuss another clash between Great Britain and America off the eastern coast, and get further updates on the development and implementation of early steam travel on American waterways. There is no time to waste, so let's get started. Welcome to 1811 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and the Senate is considering how to best handle an issue of the rules of secrecy being breached by one of its members yesterday. On the 2nd of January, Senator Timothy Pickering, a Federalist from Massachusetts, becomes the first senator to be censured when the Senate approves a censure motion against him by a vote of 20-7. Pickering is accused of violating congressional law by publicly revealing secret documents communicated by the president to the Senate. Now, you'll remember Pickering as serving as General George Washington's Adjutant General, and in 91 becoming the Postmaster General, before becoming Secretary of War and later Secretary of State, all during Washington's administration. He resigns his position in the Senate after this censure, and that's where most accounts leave it. But what is the document that he read that caused this censure to even happen in the first place? Well, it's not one favorable to the current president's position regarding West Florida. It is a letter that came from Talleyrand and was sent to James Monroe in 1804 regarding the Louisiana Purchase. This is one of the harder documents for me to have located, but I did eventually find it thanks to Mary College that has a PDF of the transcript of the letter, and to quote the relevant portions: Paris, December 21st, 1804. Sir, I had the honor to inform Mr. Livingston that I would submit to the inspection of His Imperial Majesty the letters which he addressed to me relative to the motives of Mr. Monroe's journey to Spain, and some discussions between the Court of Madrid and the United States. Among the observations made on that subject by Livingston and Monroe, His Imperial Majesty has thought that an explanation made with that fidelity which characterizes him on the eastern boundaries of the ceded territory would put an end to the differences to which this cession has given rise. France, in giving up Louisiana to the United States, transferred to them all the rights over that colony which she had acquired from Spain. She could not, nor did she wish to cede any other, and that no room might be left for doubt in this respect. This is to say, that Spain restored to France what she had received from her in 1762. All the territory lying to the eastward of the Mississippi and the river Iberville, and south of the 32nd degree of north latitude, bears the name of Florida. It has been constantly designated in that way during the time that Spain held it. It bears the same name in the treaties of limits between Spain and the United States, and in different notes of Mr. Livingston, of a later date than the Treaty of Retrocession, in which the name of Louisiana is given to the territory on the west side of the Mississippi, of Florida that on the east of it. According to this designation, thus consecrated by time, and even prior to the period when Spain began to possess the whole territory between the 32nd degree, the Mississippi, and the sea, this country ought, in good faith and justice, to be distinguished from Louisiana. These observations, sir, will be sufficient to dispel every kind of doubt with regard to the extent of the retrocession made by Spain to France. It was under this impression that the French and Spanish plenipotentiaries negotiated, and it was under this impression that I have since had occasion to give the necessary explanations when a project was formed to take possession of it. His Majesty is convinced that during the whole course of these negotiations, the Spanish government has constantly refused to cede any part of the Floridas, even from the Mississippi to the Mobile. The candor of these observations proves to you, sir, how much value His Majesty attaches to the maintenance of a good understanding between two powers, to whom France is united by connections so intimate and so numerous. His Majesty, called upon to give explanations on a question which interested France directly, persuades himself that they will leave no ground of misunderstanding between the United States and Spain. He saw with pain the United States commence their differences with Spain in an unusual manner, and to conduct themselves toward the Floridas by acts of violence, which, not being founded in right, could have no other effect but to injure its lawful owners. So, that's pretty conclusive. West Florida, at least from the perspective of the French government who signed the Louisiana Purchase, was not in fact ceded to the United States. With all the conflict going on between these world's powers, and even internally in the case of France, nobody is watching as America quietly changes history, and Pickering resigns with supporters of the administration glad to divert attention from the constitutional issues raised by President James Madison's decision to seize West Florida without congressional authorization. Censure is the result for Pickering's readings of this letter that is still confidential, but it's often argued that the goal is to censor the unfavorable information. In regards to this ongoing annexation of West Florida, James Madison writes on the 3rd of January, the day after Pickering's censure, saying that West Florida is well known to be claimed by the United States, and further writing, I recommend to the consideration of Congress the sensibleness of a declaration that the United States could not see, without serious inquietude, any part of a neighboring territory in which they have, in different respects, so deep and so just a concern, pass from the hands of Spain into those of any other foreign power. I recommend to their consideration also the expediency of authorizing the executive to take temporary possession of any part or parts of the said territory, in pursuance of arrangements which may be desired by the Spanish authorities, and for making provision for the government of the same during such possession. After several days of debate behind closed doors, both houses of Congress on the 15th of January agree on a resolution that the United States, under the peculiar circumstances of the existing crisis, cannot, without serious inquietude, see any part of the said territory pass into the hands of any foreign power, and that a due regard to their own safety compels them to provide, under certain contingencies, for the temporary occupation of the said territory. On the same day, Congress also approves an act authorizing the President to take possession of and occupy Spanish territory east of the Perdido River in the event of an arrangement being made with local authorities to deliver the region to the United States, or in the event of an attempted occupation by any foreign power. The President is authorized to employ any part of the United States Army and/or Navy he deems necessary, and $100,000 is appropriated to cover the costs. Should the territory come into the possession of the United States, the President is also authorized to establish a temporary government until Congress can make other provisions. And with that, the entire crisis over West Florida is, at least for now, resolved, though eventually Spain does push their claim on the territory, and we'll address that as it comes up. Now, back in 1807, the Common Council of New York City was seeking to provide for the orderly development and sale of the land of Manhattan between 14th Street and Washington Heights, but they were unable to do so because of not only political reasons but objections from property owners already in the area, so they asked the New York State Legislature to step in, which they did, appointing a commission to draw up a plan. Now, on today, March 22nd of 1811, the Commissioner's Plan of Manhattan is presented, and the plan presented is one of the more famous American uses of the gridiron plan, and it has long-lasting results. Now, even at the time, this plan faces criticism for its brutal efficiency over beauty, but New York, being the country's most populous city, as we mentioned last year when recounting the 1810 census, the plan is accepted to enable the maximum future growth of the metropolis. Interestingly, in this plan, which you can see a photo of on our X today, even the 843 acres that will later be designated to what we now call Central Park is covered in a grid of streets and lots marked for development. It's been 4 years now since the infamous Chesapeake Leopard affair, and today brings another naval conflict that turns the tides in the growing American-British hostilities. It all starts when the HMS Gary Hare stops a vessel that reliable sources variously state is either the brig USS Spitfire or a simple merchant ship, just outside of New York Harbor, and impresses sailors, including at least one American citizen. Now, from here, accounts vary so wildly that I just had to choose one and stick to it instead of recounting both simultaneously, so this comes from an official United States Navy website operated by the Naval History and Heritage Command. Secretary of the Navy, Paul Hamilton, orders the USS Argus and President to patrol the coastal areas from the Carolinas to New York in response to the actions of the Guerriere. The commanding officer of the President is none other than Commodore John Rogers. Rogers sails up the coast toward New York, but when the Little Belt is spotted off the coast of the Virginia Capes on May 16th, Rogers believes it to be the Guerriere and pursues. The Little Belt's captain is Arthur Bingham, and Bingham signals the president asking for identification and receives none. He notices a blue pennant designating the ship's nationality, but continues south, and the president continues pursuit because Rogers is interested in identifying the ship that he by this point knows is not the HMS Guerriere. From the very first maneuvers of this pursuit, it appears to Bingham that the president is trying to rake his ship. In response, Bingham maneuvers to prevent his ship from being in the line of fire, and both captains demand that the other identify themselves. Shortly after, a shot is fired, and again, it's disputed on who shot first, but both ships are now fully engaged in a barrage in which the much larger American ship has an overwhelming advantage. After only 15 minutes, most of the British guns are inactive, and Rogers gives the order to cease fire. The president then moves in and asks Bingham if he has struck colors. Bingham replies that he has not, and the president again withdraws. Now, the president sustains only one injury, while Little Belt takes 9 deaths during the battle and 23 injuries. The sloop is badly damaged in the attack as well, and 2 of the wounded Britons die the following day. The president, in much better shape, sails back to New York City, and Little Belt heads to Halifax for repairs. The two nations, both America and Britain, argue about how the battle began and for what reasons for months. Rogers claims that he has mistaken the British ship for a larger frigate and is adamant that Bingham has fired first. The Admiralty in England expresses their confidence in Bingham. However, Rogers is commended for the action by President James Madison, and many Americans see the incident as payback for the Chesapeake Leopard affair. The first of 2 signers of the Declaration to die this year is Samuel Chase, who was born in Somerset County, Maryland in 1741. And I've got a lot of cool stuff to mention about Mr. Chase. Now, not much is actually known about Chase's early life other than that he was homeschooled by Rector Chase in Latin, Greek, literature, and history. In 59, at the age of 18, Chase moved to Annapolis and entered the law offices of Holland and Hall to be trained in law, and eventually was admitted to the bar. During his 4-year apprenticeship in the firm of Holland and Hall, Samuel had an active life in Annapolis, making friends with young men and finally being accepted into one of the social clubs that were the hallmarks of gentlemen. It's there that he met William Paca, the son of a wealthy Hartford County family, and the two forge a friendship that will last their lifetimes. In November of '64, Chase ran for one of Annapolis' seats in the Maryland General Assembly, and he won in a highly contested, vicious, and nasty election. Chase's election to the General Assembly coincided with the British Parliament's passage of the Stamp Act, and opposition to this act spread throughout the colonies, and even more so into Maryland, where Lord Baltimore saw that the Stamp Act was a direct violation of the 1632 Charter that promised Maryland immunity from taxation by the Crown. Massachusetts citizens found a loophole, because the act could not go into effect without stamped paper. Therefore, the tax could not be collected if the stamped paper could not be distributed. They seized upon the idea to convince the appointed distributor to resign so that no stamped paper could be available, and it worked. In '65, the distributor was forced to resign by a sizable and angry Boston mob. When news of the exploitation of this loophole reached Maryland, the precedent for action had already been established, so an Annapolis merchant, Zechariah Hood, who was appointed to distribute the stamped paper throughout Maryland, was surrounded by a crowd with Samuel Chase as the ringleader. We talked about this and the burning of the effigy in discussion of Paca's life, and if you remember, the event actually does succeed in frightening Hood into fleeing to New York for sanctuary. This resistance to the Stamp Act elevated the position of Chase as a prominent political figure throughout the colony. From '67 to '73, Chase was taken up with Maryland politics and became known for his advocacy of those in the middle class. In May of '74, the British passed the first of what were to become known as the Intolerable Acts, and Chase convened a public meeting in May that called for a boycott on all imports and exports to Britain until the act was repealed. The provincial convention elected Chase, along with Paca and others, to represent Maryland at the First Continental Congress, and Chase arrived in Philadelphia on September 3rd, immediately beginning to make friends with representatives from other colonies. One of the first was John Adams, who became Chase's lifelong friend. In February of '75, Samuel Chase wrote in a letter to James Duane, "When I reflect on the enormous influence of the Crown, the system of corruption introduced as the art of government, the venality of the electors, the radical source of every other evil, the open and repeated violations by Parliament of the Constitution, I have not the least dawn of hope in the justice, humanity, wisdom, or virtue of the British nation. I consider them as one of the most abandoned and wicked people under the sun. Our dependence must be on God and ourselves." When Chase returned to Philadelphia on the 11th of June, after a trip to Canada attempting to convince the Canadians to join the colonies in a Free America Association, he was told that earlier in May, Maryland's provincial convention had ordered its delegation to work for reconciliation and to oppose independence from Britain. This tied his hands in the early debates about independence. However, he went to Annapolis to drum up popular discontent, and on June 28th, faced with a horde of citizens clamoring for independence, the provincial convention in Annapolis unanimously authorized its delegates to the Continental Congress to vote for independence. With approval now granted, Chase spends the following 2 days riding the 150 miles between Annapolis and Philadelphia to bring the news of the new authority to the Maryland delegation, and on the morning of July 1st, he relayed the authorization of the provincial convention to Maryland's delegates. Now, they were able to vote for independence, but as his wife was ill, he immediately returned to Annapolis, and from what I can tell, he was not present in Philadelphia when the vote for independence was cast on July 2nd, nor for the adoption of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. It seems Samuel Chase returned to Philadelphia on the 17th, and on August 2nd, along with other members of the Congress, including his friends Adams and Paca, Samuel Chase affixed his signature to the Declaration of Independence. Chase spent most of his time during the war on his practice of law and helping write Maryland's Constitution, as well as the new nation's Articles of Confederation. Although the Maryland legislature had nominated him to attend the Constitutional Convention later, Chase turned down the appointment as he was at the time a staunch anti-federalist. It took him years to shake the stigma associated with not supporting the Constitution, especially in the eyes of President Washington, though Chase was later appointed to the Supreme Court in 1796 and eventually became viewed as so staunch a Federalist that Jefferson tried to get him impeached in 1804. By early 1811, Samuel Chase knows that his days are numbered and sends for the Reverend Joseph G.J. Bend and receives the Holy Eucharist. That brings us to today, June 19th at 11 p.m. when he passes away, his physicians listing his death as ossification of the heart. John Quincy Adams would later go on to write of the signer, "I considered Mr. Chase as one of the men whose life, conduct, and opinions had been one of the most extensive influences upon the Constitution of this country. He not only signed the Declaration of Independence, but was an active and distinguished member of the Congress during and early and most critical period of the Revolution. He was a man of ardent passions, of strong mind, of domineering temper. His life was consequently turbulent and boisterous." On July 9th, at the mouth of the Snake River, where it joins the Columbia over on the Pacific West Coast, British-Canadian explorer David Thompson erects a pole with a sign claiming the surrounding country for Great Britain. He also leaves a British flag with the Wallula Indians who control the area as a statement to the American fur traders of Astor's Pacific Fur Company, who are competing with Thompson's own Northwest Company of Canada for the rights to this land. As time will tell, claiming this vast western land is not as easy as simply saying that you did, and the Canadian Northwest Company never builds their planned post here. Now, on August 2nd, another signer of the Declaration, William Williams, passes away. He was born in Connecticut in 1731, and in the legacy of his father and grandfather, William enrolled at Harvard College at the age of 16 and graduated at 20 with honorable distinction. He then commenced theological studies with his father, but his plan for life to follow the Christian ministry was interrupted when the French and Indian Wars broke out and he enlisted in the Continental Army. He joined his uncle, Colonel Ephraim Williams, and accompanied a British military expedition to Lake George in northeastern New York. On September 8th of 55 at Rocky Brook, 4 miles from Lake George, British Major General William Johnson, leading 1,200 provincial troops, engaged the French in a fierce battle, and reportedly the very first volley of the enemy strikes him in the head. William returns home after this wartime experience with a feeling of contempt for the British officers in general, who were haughty and openly regarded the colonists as inferior. Sometime after returning home, Williams married Mary Trumbull, the daughter of Royal Governor Jonathan Trumbull, the only royal governor to support the Revolution, and Williams' now brother-in-law, also a John Trumbull, became a famous painter of Revolutionary War moments, including the iconic depiction of the signers and the surrender at Yorktown. Williams served as a colonel in the Connecticut militia, and in 75, he went from house to house soliciting private donations to defray the cost of sending Connecticut troops to aid in the capture of Ticonderoga. The Connecticut Assembly appointed Williams a delegate to the Second Continental Congress in June of 76 to take the place of Oliver Wolcott, and he quickly voted for the July resolution and signed the Declaration in August. In 79, Williams accepted worthless paper money in exchange for $2,000 in coin that he used for military supplies, and he is said to have remarked that if independence was established, he'd get his money back, and if not, the loss would be of no use to him anyway. Williams was a delegate to the convention which adopted the Articles of Confederation, and again in 88 he was a delegate to the ratifying convention at Hartford to consider the adoption by Connecticut of the Constitution of the United States. He voted for it, but objected to the clause forbidding religious tests. His later years were spent as a county judge, but now, after his rapidly declining health, he dies at the age of 81 on August 2nd, the 35th anniversary of his signing the Engrossed Declaration. With the passing of William Williams, there are now only 10 of the signers of the Declaration left alive. Now, really quickly, looking across the northern border, on October 9th, Isaac Brock is appointed as the administrator of Upper Canada after earlier being appointed to Major General. I only mention it because he'll be coming up in next week's stories. Now, on October 11th, inventor John Stevens' boat, the Juliana, begins operation as the first steam-powered ferry, providing service between New York, New York, and Hoboken, New Jersey. While Fulton's ship, the Clermont, predates the Juliana in operation, Fulton had experimented with steam-powered propulsion with a 32-foot boat known as the Little Juliana in 1804, and this small boat used twin augers as the means of propulsion under the boat. For this full-sized ferry, he ditches that attempt and instead adopts the paddle wheel, and history remembers this as the first ferry because Fulton's goal is longer distance travel, not just crossing the river. Alright, before we get to one of the bigger stories of the year, we have to look back a little bit to discuss the cause for it. During the summer, 4 settlers are murdered on the Missouri River by Indians, and in another incident, a boatload of supplies is seized from a group of traders. Governor Harrison summons Tecumseh, the new Indian resistance leader, to Vincennes to explain the actions of his allies, where Governor Harrison is assured the Shawnees want peace. But soon after, Tecumseh begins traveling to the south on a recruitment mission. Harrison requests funding for a military response from President Madison, and with that groundwork laid, we arrive at November 6, where Governor Harrison leads roughly 1,000 soldiers and militiamen to destroy the Shawnee village of Prophetstown, named for Tecumseh's brother, Tenskwatawa, in an effort to crush the growing resistance, which, if it feels like you're missing something, just make sure that you've listened to the episode about 1810, because that's where most of all of this started. The Prophet's followers wave a white flag upon the arrival of the Americans, requesting that Harrison and Tecumseh parley before any action is taken. As Tecumseh is still on his recruiting mission in the south, this will mean a considerable delay of the operation, but Harrison agrees, and he and his men set camp about a mile from Prophetstown on the bank of Burnett Creek. Harrison is, however, distrustful of the ceasefire, and orders his men into a rectangular defensive position for the night. Tenskwatawa is under orders from his brother not to incite war yet. Tecumseh's plan is to surreptitiously recruit a larger fighting force before staging a campaign against the settlers deemed to be encroaching on Indian land, but tonight, Tenskwatawa takes brash action anyway. He stands high above Prophetstown on a rock now called Prophet's Rock and sings war songs and chants incantations that he promises his warriors will protect them from bullets. At dawn the next morning, Harrison's men, most still sleeping, are completely surrounded by Tenskwatawa's warriors. The warriors make a diversionary attack on the northern end of the American rectangle, triggering the first shots of the battle and immediately waking up the rest of Harrison's sleeping men. Following this, the South is attacked more aggressively, and the men retreat, leaving their 2 commanding lieutenants behind, who are quickly killed. As Harrison takes command of the surprised men, the lines on the south and north are able to hold back the Indians, and Major Joseph Davies leads a counter-charge that ends with him being mortally wounded as well. After 2 hours, the superior numbers and firepower win the day for the Americans, but at the cost of 189 casualties, including multiple officers dead. The Indians, now distrusting of Tenskwatawa, who lied to them about their invincibility, retreat from Prophetstown, and after a day spent burying the dead, Harrison torches Prophetstown and begins his long march back to Vincennes. It will be months still before Tecumseh returns to his village to find it razed, but before the year is out, Harrison writes to the War Department from Vincennes with the following message. Sir, I have the honor to inform you that 2 principal chiefs of the Kickapoos of the Prairie arrived here bearing a flag on the evening before last. They informed me that they came in consequence of a message from the chief of that part of the Kickapoos which has joined the Prophet, requiring them to do so, and that the said chief is to be here himself in a day or 2. The account which they give of the late Confederacy under the Prophet is as follows. The Prophet, with his Shawnees, is a small Huron village about 12 miles from his former residence, on this side of the Wabash, where also are 12 or 15 Hurons. The Kickapoos are encamped near the Tippecanoe. The Potawatomis have scattered and gone to different villages of that tribe. The Winnebagos had all set out on their return to their own country excepting 1 chief and 9 men who remained at their former village. The latter had attended Tecumseh in his tour to the southward and had only returned to the Prophet's town the day before the action. The Prophet had sent a message to the Kickapoos of the Prairie to request that he might be permitted to retire to their town. This was positively refused, and a warning sent to him not to come there. He then sent to request that 4 of his men might attend the Kickapoo chief here. This was also refused. These chiefs say, on the whole, that all the tribes who lost warriors in the late action attribute their misfortunes to the Prophet alone, that they constantly reproach him with their misfortunes and threaten him with death, that they are desirous of making their peace with the United States and will send deputations to me for that purpose as soon as they are informed that they will be well received. The 2 chiefs further say that they were sent by Governor Harrison and General Clark sometime before the action to endeavor to bring off the Kickapoos from the Prophet's town, that they used their best endeavors to effect it but unsuccessfully, that the Prophet's followers were fully impressed with the belief that they could defeat us with ease, that it was their intention to have attacked us at Fort Harrison, if we had gone no higher, that Raccoon Creek was then fixed on, and finally Pine Creek, and that the latter would probably have been the place if the usual route had not been abandoned and a crossing made higher up, that the attack made on our sentinels at Fort Harrison was intended to shut the door against accommodation, that the Winnebagos had 40 warriors killed in the action, and the Kickapoos 11 and 10 wounded. They have never heard how many Potawatomis and other tribes were killed, that the Potawatomi chief left by me on the battleground is since dead of his wounds, but that he faithfully delivered my speech to the different tribes and warmly urged them to abandon the Prophet and submit to my terms. I cannot say, sir, how much of the above may be depended on. I believe, however, that the statement made by the chief is generally correct, particularly with regard to the present disposition of the Indians. It is certain that our frontiers have never enjoyed more profound tranquility than at this time. No injury of any kind that I can hear of has been done either to the persons or property of our citizens. Before the expedition, not a fortnight passed over without some vexatious depredation being committed. The Kickapoo chiefs certainly tell an untruth when they say there was but 11 of this tribe killed and 10 wounded. It is impossible to believe that fewer were wounded than killed. They acknowledge, however, that the Indians have never sustained so severe a defeat since their acquaintance with the white people. Alright, now on December 16th, the first of a series of earthquakes in the Mississippi Valley near New Madrid strikes, and it is estimated at an 8.1 on the Richter scale, though it will be over a century before such a scale is invented. And the third, most powerful quake of the three, that comes nearly 2 months later, comes in at an 8.8, and actually reverses the flow of the river due to upheavals in the riverbed, destroys thousands of acres of forest, and gives the Mississippi 2 new temporary waterfalls. It's reported that over this 2-month period, some 2,000 small earthquakes hit the area. Unfortunately, it's another episode that we can't necessarily leave on the most positive of notes, because on December 26th, the Richmond Theater puts on a double-billed show with the plays entitled The Father or Family Feuds, and after it, a pantomime entitled Raymond and Agnes or The Bleeding Nun. The show is packed with an excited audience of some 598 people, 80 of them being children. During the raising of the chandelier at the start of the second performance, a tangle in the line causes a still-lit lamp to contact one of the scenes suspended over the stage, and a fire starts and quickly spreads. The boy operating the lines flees, but the fire engulfs the hanging scenes, which fall onto the stage that's still hidden behind the curtain. Panic ensues, and though there's plenty of exits, they're hard to get to. Some jump out of windows from the second story, and all in all, the fire kills 72 people, including the governor of Virginia, George William Smith, and the president of the First National Bank of Virginia, Abraham B. Venable. Now, normally in historical tragedies, what you'll see is that most of the people that are killed are going to be men, followed by women, followed by children, and this one's somewhat similar, but it's kind of unusual because 54 of the dead are women, 18 are men, and none are children. The theater is never rebuilt. Instead, the place will soon become a church, which still stands to this day, and the victims of the fire are buried beneath it. Well, that is all that I've got for 1811, and all that I've got for this week. When we come back on Monday, we'll of course be starting with 1812, and I can't really think of anything important that happens in 1812. Oh, that's right, the War of 1812. So make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, you can check out our X to see a bunch of photos relevant to the episodes that we have posted for this week. Get in contact and tell me if you're enjoying the show, and if so, what you like about it. If possible, on the platform that you are listening to this on, go ahead and leave us a review or a comment. And the most important thing that you can do to help me out and help the show grow and help more people learn about American history is share the show with somebody that you know, either in person or online. We're going to be taking a little bit of a different approach to the War of 1812. Instead of just describing each of the major battles, the ones that you'll hear about on every documentary, I want to try to get a little bit more personal and tell maybe 1 or 2 detailed stories such as that, but really focus on how it affects the people of America and what public perception is like surrounding the war. So that's what we'll be covering next week. After the War of 1812 we cover next week, we're going to be entering a period of prolonged peace for America, known as the Era of Good Feelings, and with that, we'll get to focus on more scientific and technological developments, which is some of my favorite stuff to write about. Further exploration out west and a bunch of other things like that, as well as some interesting stories in politics, and we'll be focusing more on all of that stuff. A month and a half in, thank you so much to everybody who's been listening from the beginning. I know there's a couple of you out there that have just listened to every single episode. It really does mean a lot. This has been our story, 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.